kids say, or as the old people say, I'm not sure, flying solo today. I'm going to be going over the MLB slate for this evening and talk a little bit about this past weekend's festivities and answer whatever questions you guys have. I guess we'll first deal with this weekend's festivities. For those of you that weren't around, I mean, I had me myself had a very, very good weekend in DFS to say the least. Thursday we hit the lottery on MLB, and then on Saturday in that live final for MMA, which took place in Jacksonville, I was unfortunately unable to actually attend, but I was able to put a lineup in, and I have to say I haven't worked so hard at anything aside from, well, I shouldn't say that, but I've worked hard on a lot of things, but I worked really, really hard at this thing, at that live final, getting there in the first place, and then that lineup, I must have spent 15 man hours on it, honestly, throughout the course of 2 weeks. Actually, I had been researching it. I went through a lot of different content. I went back and forth on a lot of decisions, and I settled on what I thought was a really, really, I had no regrets of what I did, and I got extremely lucky to get third, actually. I had a really, really good opportunity to win. Actually, I don't think I would have won, but then I got extremely lucky to get third when one of the fights that I had faded basically busted in the first round because there was an eye poke, and the fight was basically declared a no contest, rendering two of the fighters basically 0 points. In any case, got third in that. So obviously, it's a really, really strong DFS week. Nonetheless, we're going to be pressing on, and we're going to be talking about today's slate. It's currently a 6-game slate, but that could actually be trimmed, and we're going to have to talk about that as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to do it the same way that that I always do when I go through them. I'm not going to go through just game by game. I'm going to look at it from kind of the top down, and then we're going to just do a lineup build. I think with 6 games we could probably do that pretty handily. So let's share my screen, and what we're going to be doing, again, I only do this when I'm solo, is going to be sharing the sheets. And this is the way, again, people always talk about process, and this is exactly what I do, So the first thing I'll do is I'll look at my sheets kind of visually and see what plays look to be the best plays. And then we will go into the Saberson lineup builder and actually build some lineups. Now, again, this is an early look, so these projections can change somewhat. Lineups can change somewhat for sure, as can the ownership projections. So we're looking at DraftKings for now, and you see that there's a pretty decent gap between the first pitcher and the second one. Spencer Strider with a value score, I have it at 46, and for those who have been following along these sheets since I've been running them, that's a pretty high score. 46 for a sheet's value score. The difference between 46 and 39 is actually it's meaningful. It's meaningful. It's not unfadable, but it's certainly meaningful. And I think it's safe to say that Strider rates to be the best play. It's pretty, no two ways about it. I also do see 44% ownership, which is not surprising when you have the best play. Now, again, I'm not going to get into why he's the best play, except to say that he hurls a lot of strikeouts. Now, he's actually, he's gotten touched up a little bit. So it's possible that they just lose the game, in which case he probably doesn't, if he gives up like 4 or 5 runs, while he still could get there on strikeouts, you probably don't want that, to say the least. So he's definitely the best play, and I would also say you could fade him if you want to. And what I would also say is that if you play him, I would not play the chalky stacks. The next guy that kind of shows up here as clearly the second best option when you factor in price and everything, that would be Justin Verlander. And without getting into the ins and outs of the Verlander play, it's a good time to note that this is one of the games that has quite a bit
of rain risk. The Mets game as well as the Baltimore game does carry, I won't say 50% whatever, but it's definitely at risk of postponement. So it's certainly something to consider. Now, the good thing is that it is the first game of the slate, so we're hopefully going to have some sort of idea before the slate locks what the status of these two games are. And that's obviously going to change the entire context and construct of the slate. Nonetheless, Verlander does rate to be the second best overall option against, who are they playing? Against Milwaukee. And there have been pitchers that we've targeted against Milwaukee, so that's makes sense. And he does rate to be 30% owned plus, which, it's kind of tough to eat that, but listen, he does rate to be the second best play. So once again, I'll go back to my original my original caution is that if all these games do go off and you do want to play Strider and Verlander together, you probably want to avoid the chalky stacks, which we will get to after we go through the pitching. Then we go down here, and it looks as though there's a big four-way tie, right, for the next one between Detmers, Heaney, Castillo, actually three ways, and Cease, Detmers, Heaney, and Castillo. And what's interesting, because they all have a 34 value score, what's interesting here is that all of them, well, I would actually say two of them. Heaney has quite a bit of strikeout upside. He can be somewhat volatile, but he has a really big ceiling if things go his way, as does Dylan Cease. While Castillo and Detmers look fine, I don't know what that is. Watch me get this. Hello? From who? From who? Who's that, and who are you looking for? No, you have the wrong number. We'll start with that. Okay. All right. That was a waste of time. All right. So let's look at some of these matchups. When you look at Cease, Detmers, Heaney, and Castillo, let's pull up the actual DraftKings thing here. Castillo's against Washington, and what's annoying about it is Washington doesn't tend to strike out too much. It looks like a good bit of price leverage, right, if you don't want to play Strider. But aside from that, again, it's kind of a weird, kind of lack of strikeout upside, if you want to know the truth. Heaney is like in a nut spot. I mean, you got Heaney against Detroit. Now, again, you usually like to play righties against Detroit, but who cares? I mean, that's a big upside spot. And Cease against the Angels, it's not the greatest spot in the world. We're going to get to the hitting in a minute, where the Angels actually show up as a good hitting option. But Cease always does have a lot of strikeout upside. And I actually would say that Detmers against the White Sox, the White Sox do tend to strike out a bit. It's usually against righties, but there's no disputing this. I mean, 8 strikeouts, three games in a row. As a matter of fact, I would say that given the fact that these three guys, Heaney, Cease, and Detmers, have that type of strikeout upside, and Verlander, quite honestly, has not, I would honestly play these guys, Detmers, Heaney, and Cease before Verlander. I mean, I know that they rate lower as far as my value score goes. That's FanDuel, actually. I know they rate lower than Verlander with respect to my value score, but nonetheless, I think that from a median perspective, that makes sense. I just think the overall upside of all these guys, Cease, Detmers, Heaney, just exceeds that of Verlander. Also, as we get to the stacks, you'll see that I think the Angels are going to be well projected and probably tend to garner some ownership. So you might get some leverage by playing Cease there as well. So Not to mention the fact that Cease rates to be the lowest owned of all 5 of these guys. So that would be my kind of summary of the pitchers. Is that Strider is certainly the best play. And while Verlander does rate to be the second best play, I think that the strikeout upside of pretty much all of these guys, Cease, Detmers, and Heaney, would make me want to play them over Verlander. And I think that Castillo, it's going to be a natural thing to do to try to play him against Washington, just because Washington's like so bad, and Seattle is they're a minus 250 favorite, and he's got a real a ton of win equity. And if you don't play Strider, I think it's natural to say, okay, I'll play the next highest price guy. And while that makes sense, I would not, just don't expect to get like 10 strikeouts against Washington. They just like to just survive. And down these other guys just don't rate well enough for me to get to them. Between Sonny Gray and I don't even know where my projection is on Sonny Gray. Sonny Gray is all the way down here. I mean, this is pretty much nobody else except for the guys I listed I render as playable. First thing I will say before I get into the stats is I like to look just to see if there's any like real standout values here and as far as players go. And one thing I will notice is Jordan Westburg from Baltimore at a flat 2K. He's a pretty well-hyped prospect, so I guess he's probably making his debut, and that's why he's 2K. So he's going to be pretty popular, I imagine. Probably a good play. I see Vogelbach at 2,200, so we'll get back to that. All right, so again, let's take a look at the stacks on DraftKings, and we will go back and do FanDuel then as well, but let's look at the stacks first. So the way we like to look at the stacks is we rate them or rank them 2 ways. First, we'll rate them just by raw, kind of like, raw points sort of, and then by various stack value measures. So when you rate all these guys by just raw points, you'll see that it's pretty close. You don't have a real standout. You have the Mets number 1. Now, the first thing you'll note is that the Mets are in that possible rain game. Okay, so got to keep that in mind. You have Texas next, followed by Atlanta, followed by Baltimore, who is also in that other rain game, right? What are the rain games here again? It's Mets. I got them confused. It's Mets, Milwaukee, and Cincinnati, Baltimore. Okay, so the Mets and Baltimore are the ones you have to worry about, and they do rate to be 1st and 4th as far as raw points go. Now you do see the Angels rated 5th, and Cincinnati, so it's pretty smooth along the way. Now when you rate these all by modified stack, which is the way I like to rate value, all value stack in the middle is this point per dollar. Modified stack does a little bit better job of this. I see Baltimore and the Mets kind of showing up again, followed by Seattle, the White Sox, Detroit, and then have dropped down to Texas. So what's the unfortunate reality here is this. So if there were no weather issues, I would note that Baltimore and the Mets both show up as good plays, whether you rate them by raw points or by value. So those probably look to be the 2 best plays. So you're going to have to watch the weather for this. Now, if let's say you didn't want to play either of these 2, Baltimore or the Mets, I will see Seattle, White Sox, Detroit are value. Do they show up over here? I mean, they're kind of far down, Seattle and White Sox over here. I guess the next best team I would come up with is probably Texas, because they rate number 2 over on value, and then on raw points, and then they're at least close, sort of, in value. The other thing I would note is let's look at the ownership of some of these. If you look at raw points here, you'll see that Atlanta rates well, but they're going to be owned. Baltimore rates well, they're going to be owned. So all these guys are going to be owned. I guess the Reds, but they're in that weather game as well. So it becomes very, very tricky. And when you rate them again by value, you'll see Detroit looks pretty good, sort of, relative to ownership. And like you said, Haney is somewhat volatile. So that would be
That would be kind of an interesting kind of galaxy brain play to make, is to just play Detroit. Aside from that, I got Seattle and the White Sox looking pretty similar on this side. And then once again, in raw points, a little bit further down. So what you really want is you really want the weather to hold so you can play either Baltimore or the Mets, if you want to know the truth. Like that's the reality of it. So let's before we get into the Saberson thing, let's actually try to build and see what we would get. So let's just say that we wanted to, I don't know. Let's say we wanted to play. You want to not play Strider first? Let's not play Strider first. Let's do this one. Let's do Heaney and Cease, for example. So if you play Heaney and Cease, then now you're fading the top two high-owned pitchers, that being Verlander and Strider. You're also fading the natural price pivot, that being Castillo. You're getting upside from both these guys. So you could probably then go ahead and play, I don't want to say whoever you want, but then you could play these Baltimores and the Mets. Now, again, presuming that these play, let's see what this would look like. I got to find the stack page, right? This is what I like to do, honestly. I'll go to the stack page and I'll go back, okay, so which Baltimore guys do I want to play? And what I like is first we want to start with guys. This is the way I do it. I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I want to find guys that appear in both the value side over here and the raw point side over here. So we're talking about Hayes, Arias, Mateo, and Santander. So we'll start with those. Let's put those in. Arias, to use third base. Let's play him at third base. Santander. Mateo, we said. And then, was it Hayes was the last one? Right. So you have these guys. And then whether you want to play your fifth, you could either play that Westerberg, whatever his name was. I forgot his name. Let's pull him up again. It was not Rushman. Hold on. Westberg, right? Yeah, Jay Westberg. So you put him at shortstop at 2K. And if you did that, and then you could literally play whoever you want. You know, you could go play. You could finish off your stack by playing Rushman, if you want to know the truth, and still be able to play, you know, all the top spends like in the rest of these spots if you wanted to. Okay, so paying down for these pitchers does do you a decent amount of good. Now, on the other hand, instead of Baltimore, you want to play the Mets. Again, let's forget about value for a minute. Let's just make the best plays. Let's just go right to raw points. Let's see who that would be. Alonso, Lindor, Nemo, Marte, Vogelbach. That makes sense. So Alonso. Let's just throw all these in and see what this looks like. Lindor, Nemo, Marte. Actually, Vogelbach is first base as well. So that's a decision you have to make. But here, I mean, yeah, you're paying for these guys, but you still have plenty of room. I mean, if you want to do a 5-man, you could certainly do this. Literally play whoever is in the starting lineup in these spots, and then you can fill in with whatever you want. So Baltimore, the interesting thing is Baltimore, you don't really get you can't really spend your money on Baltimore. If that makes any sense. Hayes, what you could do, again, since salary is not going to be an issue. Remember, we're rating these guys by raw points. We could go down to Texas here and play them, but the problem here is I think we're going against one of our pitchers, right? No, we're not actually. So we could go down to Texas in this build and just pay up for all these dudes against Matt Boyd. So we could play Garcia. Let's just see who rates well here. I mean, I don't know if anybody wants to play 6,200 for Seager, but why not?
Seager, Jung, Garcia, Vogelbach, Simeon. I mean, that's like really spending some dough. Let's see what that looks like. Simeon. Oh, like look at all this money being spent. See, now this is kind of tough to do. Okay, to get to all these Texas guys. And Garver, like if we wanted, that actually is pretty hard. But it's this type of lineup construction is not going to be very popular, to say the least. You know what I mean? Like if you're paying all the way over $6K for 2 Texas guys and not playing Strider at all, I mean, so this is something you can try. Let's then go. We'll build another way. Let's play with Strider. And let's play Strider. Let's not do Verlander again. Let's do one of these. I want to play something like, let's just play Detmers just as an example. Okay. So if we did that, now you have 3,700. So you have to be a little more circumspect with your values here, right? So if you pay 12, 6, and 7, now you have to be a little bit more circumspect. But the thing is, with the Baltimore, if you can get this guy in, the Westberg, then the rest of your whole lineup opens up, which is why Baltimore is going to be somewhat popular. But again, same thing. Now here, you could play the Angels if you want, but can you? I mean, if you do this, I mean, you're starting to run into issues. But again, that Westerberg value kind of renders price almost irrelevant. So you can do this, but I think that if you play Strider and Detmers or Strider and anybody, I mean, you've got to get a little bit off the board. Maybe something like, what you could do? I'll tell you what you could do. I mean, I know this is not ideal, but let's just say that Verlander is going to come in like highly owned, and there's a little bit of weather risk, but not too much. Maybe something like Milwaukee, some stupid leverage spot. Like play one of these teams against these higher owned pitchers. So that would be either, what did we decide? I mean, who's going to be the highest owned pitcher? Like all these guys. So you could play the Angels. Cease is going to get somewhat owned, I guess. Castillo. So you can play some Washington guys. I mean, that's kind of asking for trouble, but I mean, hey, if you want to get some leverage, that's what you kind of have to do. Or you can play Detroit's, but I don't know how popular Haney's going to be. I guess he has to be. So again, if you wanted to play Detroit guys just for the hell of it, I mean, you'd play like, I guess, the guys you've heard of here, right? Haven't heard of too many guys on Detroit, but let's just see what this looks like. Detroit, we would have Baez, Torkelson, Verling, Short, and Haas. What does that look like? Boy, there's like nobody here. Verling, 2,800. I mean, all of these guys are just so cheap. It's like ridiculous. Torkelson, is he a righty also? Oh, my goodness. Yeah, so if you played Strider, you play these Detroit guys. That's the thing about Haney, man. I mean, like, Haney can crack, but he can get cracked. I wonder if you could do this just for the hell of it. Like, there's no way you could play both these guys, right? I mean, you could. I mean, you could play Strider and Castillo if you commit to this Detroit business, because, like, if you didn't want to play Baez, for example, you could always go back to that cheapo for Baltimore, that Westberg. So that's basically the idea. If you play Strider, you probably want to go with either some leverage somewhere, that being, again, Milwaukee. Maybe that makes some sense. The Angels, maybe. Although it always seems weird to say that the Angels are leverage against anybody, because you're going to be playing Trout and or Ohtani, right? And they have to be popular. And Castillo is just not going to be that highly owned, so I don't think it's that relevant to play Washington. I think that maybe Texas. Well, Texas is not even leveraged. They're just high priced. You can't afford them with Strider.
So again, I think if you're going to play Strider, you're probably best to play something like Detroit or Milwaukee. So let's go back before we go into lineup builds and before we go into FanDuel. Let's take a look what these Milwaukee guys look like, just for the hell of it. And again, all this presumes that these games go off. If these games don't go off, then it becomes kind of a shit show. I'll tell you this: if both these games get postponed, I promise you, I'm not playing Strider. I mean, then it's going to be Cease and Haney. You know what I mean? And then probably pay up for Texas. That's probably, I mean, it's probably what you're supposed to do anyway, honestly. As a matter of fact, I think that is what you're supposed to do. You play Cease and Heaney, and then you play Texas. You play some Atlanta too, if you want to know the truth. But I think that's what you got to do. Texas with Cease and Heaney, just the way we built it before. Okay. I didn't talk about Seattle, but that's another team you could play in these chalky pitcher options. Anyway, let's get Milwaukee up here on the board. Let's see what these guys are going to look like. Again, this is literally the way I do it every single day. So, who's going to be in both of these ratings? So, Adames, Anderson, Tellez. Those are the first three. So, Adames, Anderson. Where do I put him? For now, I'll put him here. And Tellez. And then I take a look. So at 3,800 a man, I could probably get away with going to the expensive guys, I think. So let's just see, for example, what this looks like. You played Yelich, and who's Urias at second base, something like that. So play Urias over here. So this is, I mean, you could definitely get to this really easily. So I think it's Milwaukee would be like kind of the Strider, Detmers, or the Strider, one of these other guys, Strider, Cease, builds, or something like that. I think Milwaukee fits, and I think Detroit fits. Now, again, if you did want, let's say you did want to play the chalky Strider Verlander combination, then I think you really I don't know how you're going to get off the board enough. I think it's, once again, it's going to be Detroit. It's going to be, I think it's got to be, now it can't even be Milwaukee. Now maybe we're talking about fiddling around with Washington. What does Seattle look like before I leave Seattle here? Let me just see something. I mean, Seattle, I mean, it's hard to play guys that look like this in my profile. I mean, they're all the way down here as far as raw points, and they're okay as far as the value. So, all right, maybe they're okay. Maybe you play something like Julio Rodriguez and Ty France, start with that. So, okay, so maybe they're not bad. Let me just, for example, let me put these guys in. Let's put in Ty France. Just want to see what this looks like. Julio Rodriguez. And who was the third guy that we was in both? Let's take a look again. And then we're going to do a Saberson build. Kellenic? No. Rodriguez, France, and Teoscar. Those are the three guys to start with. So you can get away with this. Like, and here, by the way, like if you want to do the one-off of the Baltimore dude, you could do that to save a little money. So, yeah, so I guess that Seattle would be another contrarian type play. So, again, before I run the builds, let's just kind of summarize. As far as kind of like, good upside, possible actual teams that can score type teams, I would use Texas and Seattle as kind of my contrarian type takes, as well as Milwaukee. And then Detroit's sure, pure value. And then as far as pitching goes, I would say again, now if you want to play the Mets in Baltimore, if they get in, yes, play them. But those you can't play with Strider. It'd be Cease and Haney, I think, something like that. And that will do it. Now let's go into SaberSim and let's just build and see what we would get if we. I haven't done this yet, so I mean sometimes I do this in advance. This time I did not. So let's just see what I would do if I built like 50 lineups. SaberSim. Now again, this is rule number 1 is being violated right now of doing content, is to always test your technology. So it is a little bit slower than I would have liked. But okay. So we're going again. We're going to upload my projections, or the true DFS projections, more to the point. Exclude unlisted players, and we're going to build 50 lineups with the current ownerships and current projections. And we're going to see what we come up with. I'm going to predict that you do get the Strider-Verlander combination with Baltimore, because that guy, that shortstop, is so cheap. That's going to be my prediction. All the Baltimore with those guys. Let's see. Wow, and this is not what the good guys expected. All right, so first of all, pitching-wise, 80% Strider, which makes sense. And then the guys we mentioned, Cease, Verlander, Haney, whatever. But as far as the stacks go, how do you like that? 50% White Sox. Let's go. I just wasn't expecting it, but I guess, this is why you have Andrews at 2,600 and Benintendi at 2,900. They're going to make it into build. So that's one of the reasons why you use SaberSim, to cast some light on this. Now, the other thing that's interesting is that it does get me to 30% Texas. I presume there's not going to be any Strider in there. So one thing you can do, by the way, is you could just click on this button here and see all the Texas stacks. Oh, but that includes the 2-mans, so that doesn't count. So it's only 6% of their 5-man. So if you look at the Texas 5-mans, wow, they actually get a 5-man Texas stack with Strider in it. How do you do that? That's amazing. Well, because I guess you're playing Benintendi at 2,900, you Caballero at 2,600. You can make this work. And there's Vogelback, that's right, at 2,200. You do have these cheapos where you can do this, which probably means that the Texas guys aren't going to be as low owned as I thought. Now the other ones with the Texas have Irvin in it, but I'm sort of pleasantly surprised you can get there with Strider and Haney. All right, let me look real quick at FanDuel and see if there's any remarkable difference. So with FanDuel, pretty much the same, right? Strider, best play, then Verlander, then pretty close in Castillo and Detmers, then Heaney and Cease. I mean, none of this is any revelation, but you do see a much less ownership on these guys, on these cheaper guys on FanDuel, which is interesting. And when it comes in FanDuel stacks, I'm going to pull this up here. Again, if you search by raw points, you have Mets, then Texas, Angels, Baltimore, Atlanta. And when you search by modified stack, once again, Baltimore, Mets. So again, Baltimore and the Mets look to be the best plays. So we are going to be watching that Roth weather report. So lock is at 7. I imagine that Bobby's going to be here at 6, and I'm going to join you guys as well. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in. But in the absence of any questions, I think that going to qualify as the end of the breakdown. I guess that'll do it. Good luck, everybody, and I will see you guys at 6 for the live before lock.